So how do you imagine President-elect Trump and Secretary Price, if he gets confirmed, are going to try to repeal and replace? Let's begin with, is it going to be repeal and delay, or is it going to be repeal and replace?
I think it's going to be repeal and delay. Basically, the thing is, as we've alluded to, you need 60 votes to fully replace the ACA with something different. In particular, the ACA's insurance regulations and non-group market, those are the things that you really can't touch through the reconciliation process, which it has to focus on fiscal policy. It can't really focus on regulations that aren't germane to the deficit. So they have to be related to revenue or spending. And you could certainly make the argument that some of the regulations in the ACA are material to the spending, particularly because of the premium impact and things like that. But the vast majority of them, that's not the case. So you simply can't repeal the ACA in full with 51 votes. So if you want to replace the ACA fully, truly, to have a different regulatory structure for the non-group market in particular, you're going to need 60 votes in the Senate to do that. And again, my view is that the way to do that is to embrace the traditionally progressive goals of coverage expansion and improved health insurance access for lower income people, and marry those objectives to the traditional conservative goals of less federal involvement in the healthcare system. I think you can do both. And so that's my pitch on how you get to 60 votes in the Senate. Obviously, people in Congress, there are various views on how to get there or what to do, but that's why you need to have the repeal and delay strategy, is that it's going to take 1 or 2 years for Republicans to hash out their own differences about what they want the healthcare system to look like, let alone find those 8 or 9 Democrats to help them out.
Well, there's a lot of stuff in the ether out there about repeal and delay literally destroying the individual market. I mean, a lot of really well-educated health economists not mincing words about that. Your view?
Yeah, so I think there's, as there often is around changes to federal policy, a lot of wailing about the world ending that isn't necessarily accurate. There are certain things that would be policy mistakes if Republicans made changes to, for example, if Republicans were to repeal the individual mandate effective immediately, but delay the rest of the repeal until later and replace the rest of the law later, that would obviously be dangerous for the non-group markets. But
do you think it would destroy the non-group market?
It would worsen the non-group markets, absolutely. There would be more adverse selection and higher premiums for the people who remained in.
These are the same people who are complaining about high premiums? I want to just be sure I'm getting it right.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's why I've counseled that it would be a mistake for precisely those reasons. As a guy who's been speaking, I think, with a certain, perhaps greater predictive accuracy about the problems in the non-group market. So there are things Republicans do to make things worse if they aren't thoughtful about it, but I think they are starting to think about that more, and my hope is that over time, I think that just in general, since people I know are probably pretty nervous about this in the more left of center community, Republicans, members that I've talked to, are very concerned about this issue. They understand that they're in charge now, and they're responsible for future degradations of the non-group market if they make major policy changes. So they're very concerned about that, and I think they're receptive to arguments like the one you just made. So I think there's hopefully going to be some constructive dialogue about how to not make the markets worse than they already are. Now, let me just say, there's been an argument out there in the press and to some degree in the academic community that simply the act of repealing the ACA's funding provisions effective 2020 means that insurers will abandon the market today. That's not true. I talk to insurers all the time. None of them say that. So they just want to make, every year, every plan year is an opportunity for them to have a business and
lose money
and lose or make money depending on how things go. So so long as the market is structured in a way that they understand and can price their products accordingly, they're not going to flee the market. They'll only flee the market if there's such policy uncertainty because of regulatory changes that Republicans make that are not economically rational.
Well, you and I must be talking to different CEOs of insurers, because most of them this is at best a marginal product. And if the market's going to go away in 2019, why am I going to spend any time, any resources, a cent thinking about it today, especially since it takes 1.5 years for me to price and get regulatory approval. So most of the ones I'm talking to are, yeah, we'd get out, and maybe with AHIP, throw us some bones and we might stay in a little longer, but we're not going to stay in enthusiastically. And that does sound like it will disrupt the market pretty severely.
I mean, you're working in a much higher tax bracket than I am, Zeke. You're probably talking to the Uniteds of the world for whom it is a small business, but for the
They don't talk to me, don't worry.
The Blue Cross Blue Shields, who in various states, it is actually a significant part of their business because they're in that state and they're the insurer of last resort, and for them, this is a very important problem. And so I think they're very concerned about policy changes that would degrade the markets further. Particularly, for example, cost-sharing subsidies. That's something they're concerned about because there have been some Republicans who've made noises about zeroing that out.
So what would repeal look like on January 6th, the purported date that it's going to pass?
I don't think it's going to be January 6th. I think it's going to be after the president is inaugurated because he has to sign it, of course, and I think it'll be not on Inauguration Day. I think it'll be after that as well. So first quarter of 17, let's say, would be the timeline for the repeal via reconciliation.
And what would be in the repeal?
Yeah, so first, most important thing to understand is the effective date of the repeal would be 2019 or 2020. So it wouldn't be an immediate repeal, it would be a...
You think they do it right before a presidential election? I mean, you're a politically savvy guy. I mean, that seems one of the things that killed this presidential election is that we got rid of the reinsurance and the other provisions for the insurance company, so we saw this big spike in premiums just ahead of a presidential election. It seemed like a silly thing for us to do. Self-inflicted wound, if you ask me.
I'm not sure. Do you mean when the effective date would be or when the bill would be signed into law?
No, when the effective date.
I think the effective date would be, they haven't decided exactly, but the idea is that it would be sometime in 2019 or 2020. So after the midterms, but before the presidential election. I'm not the political strategist. I'm just a guy who with a spreadsheet and a computer. So I leave those decisions to people who actually talk to voters more often than I do. But I think that in general the idea is that first of all you need the timeline to hash out differences and come up with a bipartisan solution. And one thing that some people are talking about, I'm personally not talking about it, but some people are talking about is that there are going to be 25 Democrats in the Senate up for re-election in 2018. And so the thought is, if a bipartisan solution comes about, and that credibly covers roughly the same number of people as the ACA, and there are some Democrats who oppose it for partisan reasons as opposed to reasons of philosophy or principle, then the midterms can be an opportunity to litigate that.